Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. We're in the studio again with Walter and Sonika Veit. And we've just been hearing about your research on dairy and on protein and how that all transpired. Now, we haven't heard about how you started moving internationally. This was all in South Africa up until this point. How did you get into preaching and presenting in other countries?
Well, I was preaching quite regularly in South African churches, and there was one church in particular that had been started, which was a German church. And since I'm capable of speaking some German, being from a German background, I preached there sometime. And then one of your relatives from Germany, your uncle,
Yes,
he came to South Africa, and of course, being German, he went to the German church, and there he heard me preaching once or twice, and he also came to visit us, and then he invited me to come to Germany. But that's quite an interesting story. At that stage, we were driving around in a clapped-out vehicle that took some beholding, because we had all these financial turmoils. We were so heavily mortgaged because of the farm issue still. We didn't have money to buy a car. And of course, I had to have a car to get to work and back. So what I'd done is I bought a scrap car off a scrap heap that had a totally trashed body. It was totally falling apart, but the engine was still relatively okay. And I bought that for next to nothing. But I couldn't drive with it because the body was totally trashed. And then I found another one, the same type. It was an old Audi that had no engine whatsoever, but the body was fine. No transmission, no engine, no nothing. And so Sonika and I proceeded out of two vehicles to make one. And so she and I...
That was quite a thing, because I had to transfer parts from the one to the other, and my fingers were actually bleeding from trying to get the stuff screwed in. And
I had no idea how to build a car, but we
built a car.
And so we drove around in this thing. It was smoking like crazy. I don't think it was too roadworthy, but they did get it through. And Stan looked at this thing and thought, this is impossible. Anyway, he leaned back to Germany. And in the meantime, we were trying to get a vehicle that, might just be better for us. But we couldn't afford a vehicle. And I don't know whether you have them here, but they have these car auctions where you can bid on a vehicle. And we found at one of these car auctions quite a nice pickup, but it looked too nice. I didn't think we would be able to afford it. And while we were looking at the vehicle, two people came up to us and said to us, the highest bid on that vehicle is, and I can't remember how much it was.
I don't remember.
Whatever. I still looked at them and I said, these people are off the wall, because the next bidding is when that thing is opened, that box where you throw your bid in, and that's only in 2 weeks' time. So how would they know what the highest bid is, right? It's a stupid thing to say. How do they know what the highest bid is going to be? There's another 2 weeks of bidding. But it intrigued me, and so I said to my wife, let's bid 100 Rand more today. That's $10 more. Mm-hmm. So I bid $10 more, put it in there. And we laughed because it was such a ridiculous amount, it was going to be impossible. And 2 weeks later, I went back and they unlocked that thing and they took out all the things and packed them out, and they were putting them in categories, and they were saying, this is the bid, this is the bid. And then the highest bid was mine, and it was 100 Rand, those $10 more than the other bid. And I said, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. How could that person have known what the next bid is going to be when there's still this time for bidding? And so the auctioneers, they looked at the bid and they rejected the bid. They rejected it. They said, no, it's too low. It's way below the baseline that they had. And I hung around until everyone was gone, and I said, so you rejected that one? I said, that's my bid. Yes, no, you'll have to double that. I said, how do you know? Why don't you phone the people who have the minimum payment? He says, no, it's the bank. We know them. They won't take it. It's a repossessed vehicle. They won't take that bid. I said, how do you know? Why don't you phone them? And they said, no, you're wasting my time. I said, well, phone them. And they phoned. And lo and behold, the bank said, give it in. So we got that vehicle at that price, and we were overjoyed, had the old vehicle standing there. And then we had to go to Germany. And then they said to us, probably not understanding our financial position, could you pay the aeroplane ticket and you'll be reimbursed when you get to Europe? Now what? We didn't have money to buy an aeroplane ticket, and we had no assets. But we thought we'll make a plan somehow and work it out. I didn't want to tell them I don't have money to buy an aeroplane ticket. After all, I'm German and I have my pride too. And then she had a teacher's loan, which I had never paid. And at some stage we were being, this is years before, we were being sued for this teacher's loan. And so I sent them a ridiculous amount and they accepted it. And now legally, when they accept that, you can keep on paying that ridiculous amount. It was something like 20 Rand, which is $2 a month that we sent to them. And now all of a sudden they'd got their ducks in a row and they sued us. We had to pay that loan immediately or face the consequences. So now we were in big trouble. What was I going to do? No money, this loan over my head, aeroplane ticket. The only asset we now had is that vehicle that we just bought. And it was very painful. We prayed about it. We worked out how much is the airplane ticket, how much is the loan that we have to repay. Okay, that's so much. We put the vehicle in the market for that much, and within 1 hour it was gone. So I paid her loan, that was paid the airplane tickets, but now I had a crisis. Because in the university recess I was to go to Europe, and where do I get money to give her when I leave now? Because I'd spent my salary in advance already. So what am I going to do now? Am I going to go away for a month and my family is without food? So we wrestled with that, and then we got a phone call from someone who didn't know us, from a bar of soap. Where was Wish from?
From at least 4 hours drive from us.
Yes.
Somewhere in the middle of the Karoo.
And this person said to us, are you Walter Fight? And I said, yes. And this person said, well, I had a dream. And I said, what dream did you have? She says, I had a dream I must give you something. And I'm sending my son who works in the Cape, he's going to come and he's going to give you something. I said, what did you dream? She says, no, I just dreamt that I have to give you something and I'm going to give that to you now. So I said, well, thank you very much, whatever. And then this young man arrived and he gave us an envelope. And in it was enough money to take care of the family for that month. So somebody had a dream in the middle of nowhere, and that solved that problem. But the only other problem was now I didn't have a vehicle anymore. It had been sold. So all this thing with the vehicle was to make enough profit that I didn't have to go and beg anyone for solving my crisis. So God solved those crises for me. Then I got to Germany, and lo and behold, I met with very exciting events. One of the first colleges I went to was one of our own colleges, and I was to lecture on evolution and creation, because I had a whole lecture series on that by then, of course. And the students sat in the college, and I was about to start. I was introduced, and the class representative student got up and said, "Excuse me, are you going to speak on behalf of evolution or against evolution?" Now this is an Adventist institution, right? I look at him as though he's fallen off a bus, and I say, "I'm going to speak on behalf of creation." He says, "Well, neither I nor any of us are going to listen to such rubbish. We are not interested in your stupid speculations. We believe in evolution." And the whole class walked out.
Wow.
They just walked out. That was my first experience with the Europeans. Okay. But now they were sniggering. There were about 4 or 5 that were embarrassed and sort of stuck to their chairs and still were inside the hall, and the others were out in the hall, in a hallway, and out in the foyer and wherever. And I was feisty in those days. So I opened the windows and I opened the doors, and I said to the 4 or 5, and I started speaking at the window. So I was actually talking to these outside, and this ringleader was going crazy. And then I said, "You know, there are people that are so cowardly that they're not willing to listen to the evidence. They make up their mind before they listen to the evidence. And people that are of that nature are either brain dead or spiritually blind." And then I said, "Here's the evidence. And by the way, you cowards out there, here it is." And I put it on the screen. And every time I had a slide on the screen, I say, "You cowards, look here, look here." And didn't go too well. But the next day, second lecture, place was packed. They were all back.
So, Walter, you were pretty obnoxious to those students who didn't want to hear your lectures, shouting at them like that through the window. What do you think about how you handled that?
Well, you see, I believe God uses you where you are. And He doesn't wait until you're perfect, now you can go. He uses you when you are willing to go.
I agree.
So at that stage, I probably felt God needed a little bit of assistance. So I gave it in my particular way.
In your own particular fashion?
But today I would probably think he's quite capable of handling it himself, and I would have probably not done it that way. Hopefully, at least. So we did our lectures there in that way, and then I also lectured on the health issue. So I started writing my book, and that created a furor, and I had opposition from the medical people. And there was one person there, he was so obnoxious. And he was sitting next to a lady, and he was interrupting me all the time and saying that I was backward and should go back to my trees and whatever. But I was busy writing a book on the issue. I had the scientific publications, and of course, being Germany, they think German is everything. There are no other languages, and nobody is as scientifically and technologically advanced as they are, or some of them think that way. And so I started quoting in some of the magazines, and I actually had, because I was still writing some portions, some of the publications with me. And I started getting a little bit sarcastic with him, because he would refute something, and I say, well, this is the German journal Nature. This is the best journal in the world. And here's the journal Science. That's the equivalent in the United States. And here's the journal Lancet. But you don't understand English, so I don't think you understand this modern stuff, do you? I was getting a little bit shirty. So he got annoyed. And he started getting quite vindictive. And I looked at him like this, and I said, you know why you're giving me so much opposition? Is because you have such a bad diet. And I can see it in your face. Look at the veins on your face. You're all red. The blood is going through your skins because your arteries are clogged. That's why you can't think properly. And that did it. He exploded. And then to crown it all, I said to him, if you look around you, if you look at the lady next to you, she has a much nicer complexion than you have. Perhaps you should ask her what to eat.
You weren't very tactful.
No, but he annoyed me. He really riled me. So he threw his toys out of his cot and he left. He stomped out. I felt a little bit bad having been so forthright, but I finished my lecture without interruptions. Maybe nobody dared after that, I don't know. And after the lecture, I was packing my things and I was thinking, that was quite embarrassing. And this lady came up to me, the one that sat next to him, and she said to me, that was my husband. I thought I was going to die. I didn't know it was the husband. And then she said to me, and thank you for doing that. I've been trying to live healthily in my home, and he makes my life hell. This is the first time someone's put him in his place. Thank you so much. So that was one of the first experiences in Germany. And we went to many places and lectured, and it went actually quite well. And we rolled back some of the opposition. The health issue didn't always go down so well, but some of our colleges then started forming groups, and the health message actually started getting a foothold. And the next thing, when we were finished with this German tour, at the airport, your uncle says to me, when he was in South Africa, he saw what a horrendous vehicle I was driving. Do I still drive that vehicle? So I said to him, well, it's the only one I had left. I just sold the other one. I didn't tell him that. I said, yes. He said, well, that's not a fit thing to drive. You can't drive with a thing like that. And he says, we as a group, and it's lots of people, not just me, we all contributed something, and here's an envelope for you, and there's a little note in it, and you may only open it when you get home. And don't think it's from me. It's not from me, it's from many people, so it's no big deal for us, but it'll help you. So I felt a bit bad taking that, but I said thank you, came home, opened it, and in it was money and a letter which says, with this money you may only buy for yourself a new car. But it must be a new car. It says you must buy yourself a new car. Now, new car can be interpreted new car, or it can be interpreted another car. But I interpreted it new car, but you couldn't buy a new car for what was in it. Because we have very expensive cars. Our cars are highly taxed, much more expensive than in Europe or in America, much more expensive. And you couldn't even buy the dinkiest little thing new. You couldn't even buy Uno new. You'd have to almost double it, so forget it. You can't buy a new car. So I said to my wife, I don't think you can buy a new car with this. And we looked, there's no car that you could buy for it. So we decided that it must mean a newish car.
Something new to you.
Something new to me.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we went and had a look for another vehicle. And we went from dealer to try and buy something that's reasonable for that price. But it kept bothering me that it said new car. And then we were about ready to buy a second-hand car for a reasonable price, when the dealer said, but why don't you buy a new car? I said, no, I can't afford a new car. And in any case, they're too expensive. I don't have enough money. He says, well, take a loan. He didn't understand, you see. I was loaned up to the hilt. I said, no, I can't take a loan. So then he said, well, we have a vehicle. There are another 3 left in the country, I think. And it's a Volkswagen Jetta, and there it is. I said, no, forget it. I can't afford a Volkswagen Jetta. That's way too expensive. He says, no, but the new model has come out, and there are still 3 of the old model, and they've been marked down. They're almost half price. They're just a little more than half price. So I said, that's interesting. And he said, we have one. And I think there's one there or one there. So I looked at it, and it was too much. I couldn't afford it. Couldn't buy half a Jetta. So I said, no, it's too expensive for me. I can't do it. So he said, that's ridiculous. This car is half price. It's cheaper than these second-hand cars. You would be an idiot if you didn't take this car. I said, yes, I know, but I can't do it because I couldn't take any more loans. And so he said, okay, that's sad. And so his boss came out and said, where do you work? I said, I work at the university. He says, but the university qualifies for fleet discount. So the salesman said, yes, but this car is marked down, so they won't give fleet discount on it. So he said, phone the factory. So he phoned Volkswagen factory, which is in Port Elizabeth, and says, we have a man here who works for the university, he qualifies for fleet discount, but this is a marked down car, but it's a new car because you only get it on new cars. And they agreed that I could get fleet discount, and guess what? To the cent, with licensing, that vehicle was exactly what was in the envelope. And that just made me think. Because what did it take? It took getting a new car almost, well, I believe, miraculously. Getting a new car and then having to sell it. Mm-hmm. Why? Because I was going to go do evangelism overseas. That was the reason. I had to buy an airplane ticket, which was reimbursed, but nevertheless, it was like little Isaac that you were willing to sacrifice, and God gave it back. And that vehicle lasted miraculously, didn't it?
The tires, remember?
The tires, I did over 180,000 kilometers on one set of tires.
Wow.
That's impossible. You get 40, 50,000 on a set of tires. They just wouldn't wear out. They were like the shoes like of the Israelites. And the mileage that we did with it was all evangelistic mileage. So God takes care of all those little details.
Mm-hmm.
And it encouraged us to constantly think, like the text says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. And this was our motto from then on. We would constantly first do what we have to do and what we would like to do for the Lord, and everything else followed.
Yes, I had to gain a lot of experience. I had to understand prophecy. I had to understand history. I had to understand archaeology. This is all part of my lecture series. So during one vacation, somebody sponsored a trip to the Middle East, a Bible trip, which I did with Francois Duplessis. And we went through Israel and all the places. I took all the pictures that I needed for my evangelistic series that were coming up. Amongst other things, we went to Turkey to do the 7 churches, which later became one of my lecture series. And there was a Muslim tour guide who took us to the 7 churches. So we rented a bus, the whole group, and we went on this tour. And Francois Duplessis he always has an evangelistic mindset. And so he made sure that I would sit always next to the tour guide. And the tour guide would say what is happening there in this city, in Ephesus and Smyrna and Laodicea. And as the tour guide was explaining, or as she was explaining, then I would explain the other side of the story. And she became so intrigued with this that by the end, she was like one of us. And we left for South Africa. Francois even said to her, we go to church on a Sabbath. Could she arrange that the bus takes us to church on that day? So we went to church and she attended. And then we went back to South Africa, and a little while later we got a call. She would like to find out more. So this Muslim lady with her daughter came out to South Africa. We enrolled her for a course in Helderberg, but she had no vehicle. And so this old one that we had, we gave her this vehicle. And we asked her, can you drive? Have you got a license? She said, yes, absolutely. So she got into this car, we gave her the keys, she started this thing off, and she roared off as though she was taking off. What did she do? She drove straight over the pavement.
Over the pavement, almost through the garbage cans, and off at a speed.
Boom, she was gone. In any case, she would regularly modify the vehicle. She would drive through dirt cans, she would back up into walls or miss a turn and take away the side. And then she would come to us and she would cry, oh, I made an accident with your car. And we said, don't worry, it's an old car, just carry on. And then through the dirt bins. It was so funny. And she had Bible studies with us and with Francois. And by the end, she was convicted and wanted to become a Christian, a Seventh-day Adventist, but she was afraid of being murdered when she returned, because that's what often happens to someone who converts. And later she emigrated to America, and she married an Adventist pastor, and she translated many of the writings and works in those areas to this day. So there was an interesting experience with some of these trips. But then the next one was that you came to South Africa.
Yeah, we did.
You must tell what happened
1992.
there. Well, what happened then?
Well, we went to South Africa for a visit with my uncle, just to see the countryside, and there we met you. He introduced you to us, and we were thinking, this would be a great speaker for North America, and so we planned with you a series in 1993 in the Massey Theatre at New Westminster.
Yes.
And that was quite an experience. For us, our first evangelistic series, we were just laymen, we didn't know what we were doing. And God filled that hall to the last seat.
Yes, now that was my first real public evangelistic campaign. I mean, I'd done lectures in Europe, but they were largely in a church setting. Here was a public campaign in a foreign country for me, my first, and it was the Massey Theatre. And my message was quite controversial, because I would deal with the papacy. Now, you must understand why the papacy was so important to me, and why the connections with the occult world were so important to me. Because remember, I'd come from that world. And I'd had so many experiences with my father-in-law, and I knew that the occult world was not some airy-fairy thing that was happening somewhere, but that it was real, that it was involved in politics and also masonry. I started giving lectures on the secret connections and the secret societies. And as I lectured in South Africa, I had many, many experiences. Sometimes it happened that in the middle of the night, knock on the door, and here stands a person, and he was very agitated, and came in, and he said, I'm a high Freemason, and I've listened to your lectures, and I know that what you are saying is the truth on these issues, but you need a little more information. And there are books that you don't have access to, that I have access to, and I've brought you one. But if they find out that I took this book out and gave it to a non-initiated person, I will die. So you have this book until 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. Then I will come and fetch it and see that it's back in the lodge before anybody knows that it was gone. I said, all right. Now, what do I do with it? I can't read a book this thick between 12 o'clock and 4 o'clock. So what am I going to do? So I had some of those film rolls and this little black bag in that day, and roll up a film, put it in the camera, and I photographed as many of the pages of the book as I could with the titles. And by 4 o'clock, I had virtually done most of it, but I was also run out of film. And he came to fetch it, and it was gone, and then I could start studying that. I'd also had an experience in Europe, in Germany, where after one of my lectures where I touched upon this issue, I was one of the last to walk out, or the last, because you have to, you pack up your slides, and those days it wasn't as simple as today. You had all of these slides, and you have to pack them into their right sequence. And as I left the hall, I was walking down the passage, and the lights were going out, when a hand came out of what seemed like a closet, grabbed me from behind and pulled me into the closet. And I thought my last moment had come. And the man said to me, if you see my face, then that will be your end. So you will not turn round, you will not look at me, you will leave this closet, you will walk out, and tomorrow I will do the same to you, and you will not know who it was, and I will give you something. So life was getting to be interesting. And the next day I gave my lecture, and I'm thinking, what's going to happen to me? And I walk out after that lecture, and I go past the closet, nothing happens, and I go past some foyer thing, and here I am. And he gives me a pile of books. And he says, now go. You don't know who it is. And I will fax you something. I need your number. So I gave him a fax number. And he says, you promise that when you get the fax, you cut the top off and you burn it, so that there's no sendee. I said, I promise. And I left. And this is how information started coming, one after the other. And I had so many connections. My biggest problem was always connecting the papacy, the secret societies, the Jesuits. How are they all connected? Because I knew they had to be connected, because Revelation chapter 13 had said so. And the spirit of prophecy was very clear that if you study the book of Revelation, then you will know to stay clear of secret societies. And she mentions Freemasonry by name, so I knew there were connections. And I had some of the occult writings from my father-in-law, and I was studying all this stuff and putting it together. So my lectures were different from other people. They had these occult connections. And if Revelation chapter 13 says that the beast out of the sea will be the one who will be paid homage to and will control the world, and that it's spirits of demons that are doing this work, well, then this stuff is all interconnected, right? Mm-hmm. And so I was starting putting these things together, and when I got to the Massey, my first ever public campaign, this was going to be a big deal. I'd been on public campaigns, but with Francois Duplessis, I was always the sidekick. Here was something I had to do by myself, and then in a foreign land. And letters had preceded me, warning certain people that I should not talk on issues of health or something of that nature, or this or that or the other. And someone had intercepted the letter and made a copy and given it to me, so I knew it in advance. I was in trouble in a foreign land. Already I was being stabbed in the back, as it were. Get to Massey Theatre, and it seats 1,260 people.
Prophetic number.
That was weird to begin with. Now, the organizers had said that you'll never fill this hall, not with something like that. And it was cold and it was wet and it had snowed a little bit and there was some ice and it had melted again. Nobody thought it was going to be full, but it was packed. And the organizers said, no more people. If it gets any fuller, then we'll have to close it. This is fire regulations. And it was packed. And we did double sessions. So you did a lecture, you had a 20 or 30-minute break, you did another lecture.
Yeah.
Now, the only people I had contact with was the AD team. And they were in the back of the hall, and I was on the stage in the front of the hall. And I had all of these slides. And there were so many people there. And while I was starting lecturing, your city sent out tow trucks to remove the illegally parked vehicles, so everybody ran out of the hall and then to go and see whether their vehicle is being removed. But your dad went and sorted it out and went and stood in front of the trucks, and I got to know him a little bit better. He's a feisty person. He won't let himself be intimidated very readily. And so we gave these lectures. Now, there was one interesting thing. There were rows in the Massey. There were side doors and back doors. And the Massey Theatre was packed, but there was one seat that was open. Just one. And there was always the seat in the front in the first block. And that was always open. Now, why would that always be open? That's weird, because anybody can sit anywhere. There were no seat assignment. And halfway through my first lecture, the side door would open, which normally would not open during a lecture. And this little fellow with Down syndrome came in. And he would walk up and down the front there, and he was very stocky, short, and his tongue hung out. And he sang. He sort of, He wasn't a nuisance. He was just there. Then he used to sit down in that chair. And I gave the whole lecture. And then everybody would go. And then I started getting into the serious topics, talking about the Antichrist, giving these Bible lectures, bringing in some of this newer information. And there was a crowd there that got very angry. At one stage, they actually ran on the stage and shouted that I am the Antichrist and that the people should get out and not listen to me. And they were very irate and very aggressive. And in between the break, they would corner me and they would be aggressive, and some of them actually wanted to hit me. And there was no one to help me because the AD team was in the back, I was in the front, there was an audience between them and me, mingling, getting up, stretching their legs in this aggressive crowd. And I tried to appease them, but it got worse and worse. And then this little guy with Down syndrome, he used to get up and he'd take his short, stocky little arms and he'd work his way through the crowd. And then he'd come and stand next to me and he'd put his arm around me and he'd put his head on my shoulder here, on my side. He only came up to here. And then he'd look at them and he'd sing with his little la la, la la la. Now, if there's anything that's disarming, it's someone with a little Down syndrome boy stuck to him. There's no way you're going to hit someone who has a Down syndrome boy stuck to him. And so the time would come for the next session and I'd go back up onto the stage, he would go and sit down. And the next day the same thing. Now I got very dependent upon him. And sometimes, because he always came in sometime during the first lecture, he wasn't there from the beginning. Sometimes he didn't pitch. So I actually stretched my lecture to see is he going to come. I was totally dependent upon him. And then he'd come. And then I'd relax and finish the lecture and go down and face these aggressive ones. And the Downs boy would help me. And then we moved the lectures to, I don't remember where.
It was across the river to another municipality.
But it was far away.
Yeah.
Now, I always thought, the Down syndrome boy was part of the furniture. He was always alone. He didn't have any parental care. There was no peer with him, nobody to take care of him. So I thought, well, maybe he's a neighbor's kid, or maybe he belongs to the caretaker of the hall, and he's part of the establishment. So that's it, and I won't see him again. And then I finished the entire campaign, and then the very last day, the AD team was very mean to me. They gave me a whole host of lectures, I don't know, 5 or 6 in a day. And I was exhausted, and the next day I had to fly back. And I went through that entire day, and I had all my slides in trays. So I'd give the first lecture, and then there would be this tray of lecture, and then the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and they were all piled in the back there. And after the lectures, of course, I have to sort them back into their little packages so that I can carry them in my hand luggage. And in the last lecture, I'm still busy with the last lecture, the door opens and the Down syndrome boy comes walking down. Now you could have knocked me over with a feather, because what was he doing there? This is now a different part of the city. He couldn't have been part of the establishment, couldn't have belonged to the hall, couldn't have been part of the team, couldn't have been a neighbor. And he's too Downs to have traveled by himself. What's he doing there? And he sat down in the same spot relative to the other spot. There in the front, there was a seat open, and he sat there. And when the lectures were finished, the people went out into the foyer, and only he remained behind, and me. So I have no witnesses. People will just have to accept my word for it. Now I'm standing in the front at the pulpit, resorting my slide back into their little zip packages so that it's a nice small packet. And I've got 6 lectures to pack back, and it's going to clickety-clackety-clickety-clack. And I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. And he gets up, and he sings, and he walks back and forth, and then he goes round and up the stage. And he comes and stands next to me, puts his arms around me, and puts his head there, just like he used to. Now, it's quite awkward. There's nobody attacking me. I'm all alone. He's stuck here. I'm talking to him and sorting my slides at the same time and looking at him. And I'm wondering, how did he get here? And who is this? And the thought comes to me, this is too unusual. And I pluck up the courage, because I didn't really have the courage to do that, but I grab him by the shoulders and I push him away from me and I push him in front of me. And I say to him, I have one question for you. Are you a human being or are you an angel? And he took a step back and he did that. And he looked up and he walked out. And that to me was a groundbreaking experience. Mm-hmm. Because it's not by might and it's not by power, but by my Down syndrome boy. You don't have to have one big hunk of a person to come and protect you. God has 1,000 ways in which to protect you. And so when this boy did that, I was very grateful. And I've been in positions that were similar or worse. And I've never had any fear. Not because I'm not human, but because I have absolute faith that He's there. And He's not small. And He doesn't have downs.
No.
One stroke and everybody would be dead before Him. Mm-hmm. And I was in Slovenia. And I did a series there. And they wanted to stop the series. So the Orthodox Church there has its own protectors, almost like a militia, own police force. And this militiaman, this ringleader, came onto the stage and he shoved me harshly, brutally aside, grabbed the mic out of my hand, shoved my little translator, who was a tiny little lady, her aside violently, and I got annoyed with him, so he tried to shove me again, and I stood my ground. He ripped the mic out of my hand and he commanded everyone to leave the hall. And the people got up. I don't know, there was about, I don't know how many, 800 people. They got up like one man and came forward and said, you get up, because we came to listen to what he has to say and you're not going to tell us what to do. So he saw that he was going to be in trouble now, so he said, I'll be back and we will come and beat you up. So he ran out of the hall and someone called the police and there was quite a turmoil. And then the police arrived with over 200 policemen. And the chief of police and the whole lot were there. And the policemen surrounded the hall. And then the chief of police and his officers sat in the front row. And from then on they attended the entire series, all the lectures. And that militia did come back. And the police warned them that if they interfere with these lectures, they will be arrested and they won't have a trial for 6 months. They will be in jail. So they better leave. Don't know what law he quoted. And that solved the problem. So I think my audience wasn't big enough. I needed a bigger audience. So the police force was summoned.
Had to join, yeah.
And my little Down syndrome angel was there. It was interesting, when I came into the country, they interrogated me at the airport because I had everything in their writing and I didn't understand the writing because it was like Russian writing and I didn't know what it meant. So they kept asking me where I was going and who I was going to see, and I said, I don't know. And this person, he was quite obnoxious and he was pointing his rifle at me, and why wasn't I telling him what it was? And I said, I have it in writing, you can read it. He wasn't interested. I had to tell him. And I went through this for a long time. They wouldn't let me through the airport. And finally, I don't know, I must have gone insane or something. I just got up and I took hold of him this policeman or this border guard or whatever with his machine gun. I grabbed him by the shoulder and I said, you know what? You're asking me all these questions, you're asking the wrong person. The person who's coming to fetch me is the person who'll tell you what his name is and where I'm staying. So you and I, we're going to the airport, to the other side, where they will come and fetch me. And I just took him and I started walking. He was so flabbergasted he came along. And we went right through security, right past everything, into the reception hall. And I said, now you stand there and you wait. Because I didn't know who was going to come and fetch me. And the next minute, this person comes up and says, are you Walter Veit? I said, yes, thank you. Here, ask your questions. That's how I got into the country. The other thing that was interesting, I can't remember whether it was that country or another country, but they got so interested, they wanted to put me on the radio. And at that stage, this massive radio station that the Russians had used in the time of the Cold War to scramble signals. So it was one of the most powerful radio stations in that area. I think they called it
Novosibirsk.
Novosibirsk, yeah. That's right. And for some strange reasons, Adventists were given access to that media. And they interviewed me for hours on that, and it was broadcast to millions of people with translation. So doors just opened. It was unbelievable. Never underestimate how God works behind the scenes.
No, and He has 1,000 ways to solve the problems we face.
That's right.
Whether it is a Down syndrome boy or a police force or whatever, He will find a way. Well, we're going to take another break, and we thank you for joining us again. And yes, we will come back again for the rest of the story.